Welcome to the book club where the size is just right, the books aren't too long, and you never need to host. That's our job. We bring best-selling and award-winning writers of every genre to Twin Cities metro area libraries to share their stories, discuss their work, and answer those burning questions you've always wanted to ask your favorite authors. This is a book club where we don't have to argue about what the author meant. They can tell us. The book club that doesn't require a clean house or wine and cheese. And in this book club, if you haven't read the book, it's all right. Although, we hope you'll be inspired to pick it up next time you're in the library. I'm your host, Slade Kemet, and you can consider the book club rewritten because this is Club Book. Club Book is made possible by Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund, MELSA, and Library Strategies, part of the Friends of the St. Paul Public Library. We would also like to thank our partnering bookseller, Red Balloon Bookshop. This podcast features Cleyvis Natera at Scott County Library, Prior Lake. Cleyvis Natera is a Dominican-American novelist and a poignant chronicler of the modern immigrant experience. Her award-winning literary debut, Neruda on the Park in 2023, follows a grassroots push to stop gentrification in a predominantly Dominican neighborhood of New York City. Community organizer Eusebia's campaign is made more complicated when her daughter Luz becomes romantically involved with the handsome developer at the company her family so intensely opposes. Neruda on the Park earned Natera an International Latino Book Award and was selected by Nobel Peace laureate Malala Yousafzai for her Literati Book Club. Themes of home, identity, immigration, and inequality also feature heavily in Natera's literary follow-up. The Grand Paloma Resort in 2025 is a thriller set at a Dominican resort for the ultra-rich. National Book Award finalist Alejandro Varela praises the Grand Paloma Resort as a literary White Lotus. Natera has written a sexy, sinister, and intricate tale that serves as an indictment of the haves at the expense of the have-nots.
Thank you, Minnesota, for having me. Thank you, Red Balloon Books. So good to be here. Thank you for making it out. It's my first time to the Twin Cities, so I feel very fortunate and very thankful for the Club Book for having me. I was very thrilled when I received the invitation a few months ago. So today's event, for those of you who haven't been to one of these before, the way it works is that I will read a little bit from the book, and I'll tell you a little bit about me and my life. And then we'll open it up for questions. If there aren't a lot of questions, I'm just gonna keep talking. So I think it's better if some of you have questions. Have any of you actually read this book, The Grand Paloma Resort? Oh, we're gonna have fun. And then how many people haven't read it? Oh man, so we can't do spoilers? Oh, this is gonna be tricky. Or maybe coded spoilers. I'll be like, I'll wink at you, and then we'll figure it out. But yeah, well, so thank you those of you who have read it, and thank you so much to those of you who will read it, right? Yeah. Okay, I'm threatening you now. So I'm Cleyvis Natera. I arrived in the United States when I was 10 years old. We lived in Washington Heights at my grandmother's house in her apartment for the first year, and then moved to the Bronx. I'm one of four, and then we moved to Harlem, and that's where I grew for the rest of and that's where my mom still lives now. I think what's important for you to know, I'll tell you a little bit about my life now. Right now I have two children, an 11-year-old and a 13-year-old. They're not impressed by me very much. Anytime that we do anything or I get invited to go somewhere, we were in Provincetown last year, and I had done an event the day before moderating another writer. And so I knew they had my book, because sometimes we go to bookstores and my book is not there, and they're like, aren't you famous? Why isn't your book here? And I'm like, well, the book sells out when you're famous. That's so my children have a great time roasting me. And I'm very lucky because they say they don't like reading, but they read it all the time. And so I'm very proud of that because it's hard to compete with the phones and the exciting things that are happening out there. I'm married, I have a husband who's very supportive. I worked a corporate job for 20 years in insurance. And I got my graduate degree in writing right out of college, and I kept trying to start a career in writing, and it was really difficult for me. Even though I had a book, one of my besties is here, Nigar, who's also a writer, and we're having dinner right before this, and I was telling her, like, it was really difficult to start a career for me, even though like things were lined up in a way where I thought it was in the cards for me out of graduate school, but it was really like 20 years later that I published my debut. No one is gonna gasp because I look so young. Is this thing on? Okay. Even though it was really hard to get my first book published, I wouldn't have it any other way. I mean, it's been really lovely. I did a career change in my 40s, which was really scary. And when I think about, just quitting a really successful corporate career to take a shot, it was really scary, especially as an immigrant. I mean, I come from a family where people just don't make a lot of money. And so leaving a job where I was treated well and supported felt really scary, but it's really paid off. Because now I have 2 books out, and I've sold my 3rd. And so actually, I'm handing it in to my editor this week. So you guys will know. So what's so interesting about the grant, so I'll tell you a little bit about how this book came to be. So in 2020, when I started writing this book, I hadn't yet sold my debut, Neruda on the Park. I was still working at my full-time corporate job where I ran a claim department. And I worked with 5 lawyers. I'm not a lawyer, but any of you who have read Neruda on the Park know that it centers around a lawyer and a law firm. And a lot of people are always like, are you a lawyer? And I'm like, no, I worked with a lot of lawyers. So that's, I spent 20 years working with lawyers, but in an insurance context. And so what ended up happening is that, I had made the decision to seriously go back to writing right around 2018. My kids were really young, and I started working really with like a lot of focus. I went back to writing conferences in the summer with my vacation days. It was a really big sacrifice for me and my family because my kids were little, but my husband was super supportive. In 2020, I had my dream agent, and we were getting ready to take the book out to market when the whole world shut down for the pandemic. And I remember being like, I was very worried for the whole world, but I was like, I can't believe this is happening to me. I was like, am I never gonna publish a book? So even though I really cared about the world, I was very concerned that the world would finish and I wouldn't have a published book. And so, I remember when I started writing short stories, I had been thinking about writing about the Dominican Republic. I was born there. I left when I was 10. I come from a working class background, so whenever I would go back as a college graduate and then a graduate school graduate, I became an executive at my insurance job, which meant that my life looks really different from my family. And when I would go and I would stay at some of these resorts, I was just really shocked at how different life was and like what you were exposed to and the kind of beauty that was available to you from the resort, the ease of life. And I just kept noticing the workers because, I obviously look Dominican. So a lot of times people like the other guests would confuse me for being a worker, regardless of whatever I was wearing. I was constantly being told to get somebody a towel. And I would be like, sure, I'll get it. They would never see me again. So it was just really interesting being in a place where I felt like sometimes I was invisible to people and sometimes I was hyper visible to like other workers, for example. Like sometimes the workers, most of the time I was treated well, but every once in a while they wouldn't treat me well. They would be like, oh, you're one of us, get out of here. Get your own towel. And so, I started really thinking about the landscape of literature and how many books that are like vacation books that take place in the Caribbean didn't center the lives of the workers. And so when I started writing the Grand Paloma Resort, it started as little short stories, and I wanted to write about really poorly behaved workers. And the workers are making just as bad decisions as the tourists. you know, and I wanted to center the whole story around, you know, and at the time I had this concept. It ended up being just really 4 characters that are central, but the two sisters are the protagonists. And I wanted to give these 2 women this common passion, you know, and their common goal is they want to get off of the resort. The work is relentless, it's tough. They're Afro-Latinas like me. And in the Dominican Republic, it can be tougher when you're a darker skinned person to have the same kind of opportunities. And so I wanted to make them love each other and have big hearts, but I wanted to write a book where they just keep making bad decisions. And I wanted to think about complicity, like what are the kinds of things that we do sometimes in situations where survival is at risk. So like if you don't have a job, like really you everything is lost. And so under that conceit, these 2 women are pretty much gonna do everything they can to keep their jobs, even when they're crossing moral lines. And so when I started writing the book, I kept writing these delicious little stories, and I was doing them, you know, in between Zoom school for my kids and like my full-time job and my husband, like everybody's driving me crazy. And I would write these little stories where everybody was just behaving badly, you know? And so much of it was really about escaping for me, because I was like, oh, all the characters want to escape just like I wanted to escape, because we were on lockdown. And so, you know, about a year later, this show starts called The White Lotus. And I was like, are you freaking kidding me? They beat me to the punch, because even if I sold the book, which I hadn't sold at that point, I was like, this people are always gonna think that I've like riffed their idea, even though I started like years earlier. But it ended up being a boost for the book, because a lot of people have compared it. They're very different. So are there any White Lotus fans here? I love the show. So I think we're doing really different things when it comes to thinking about privilege and tourism. But you know, when people started saying this is like the White Lotus, I was like, that's a pretty good comparison, because that's a big show, you know? And this book is a very different book, but it is dealing with like similar themes. So you know, I was very lucky, because in 2020, we ended up selling Neruda on the Park, even though it was such a long journey to publishing that book. From me starting to write it to publication was 15 years. And then for this book, the Grand Paloma Resort, you know, my editor was really interested in buying a book from me, because we had such a great relationship. And so I sold the book before I finished writing it, because we decided instead of short stories, it would become a novel. And so it was really different. If any of you want to be writers or want to nerd out about the process of writing a book under a contract, it was really different than the leisurely route I took with my debut. And so it was really interesting writing a book that I felt was dealing with a lot of the themes that I feel like are so important to me, to think about class, to think about immigration, to think about who gets to belong, who gets citizenship in any given country. And for me to think about it through the lens of the Dominican Republic, even though really I'm talking about the United States, it's been really interesting, because when people think about the themes of the book, they think, oh, like this has nothing to do. But really the reason that I got inspired to write this book was because of what we were living through and what we're living through right now in terms of like who gets to belong, who gets to be an outsider. So what do you think? Is that good enough? A good setup? Yeah. Okay. Are you all warmed up? Yes. Okay. I'm seeing some smiles. So I'm going to read to you a few sections, okay? So I'm gonna read to you from the first chapter, and you don't need any setup here. I think the only thing you need to know is that there's a letter that opens this book, and it's from the hotel staff. And in that letter, they're just letting the guests know that they shouldn't leave the resort because it's dangerous. And that if you stay in the resort, you're safe because nothing bad has ever happened in the resort. Guess what's about to happen? The tourist child's mud-streaked body had become heavy, and sweat made her slippery in Elena's arms. As she made her way out from the tropical forest behind the Grand Paloma Resort, Elena headed not in the direction of the manicure grounds, but into the water-starved cracked dirt of the staff quarters. Looking down at the little girl's unconscious form, she whispered, "Please, please, please don't die on me." She wove through row after row of beautiful casitas, alternating between vibrant turquoise and the brightest yellow, with a flash of hot pink every fourth or fifth little house, each decorated with flower beds full of birds of paradise and lilac hibiscus bushes. It was the kind of sight that would make a visitor sigh in the light, unless they happened to touch the plants and realize they were plastic. Nothing got water on this part of the resort. Once she was safely inside the casita she shared with her older sister, Laura, Elena took a breath and looked around, unsure whether to lay the child on her bed or her sister's. Relief washed over her. No one had seen her. It was as if the dusty ground of that forest had lifted and shrouded her. She was paralyzed momentarily by the weight of the child's body. What was she, 60 pounds? 200? Elena was dizzy from the heat and humidity. She'd been hired to care for the now injured and unconscious child, looking after the girl by day and sleeping in a tiny, cut-sized room in the back of the kitchen of the penthouse suite that the girl and her parents occupied. She hadn't been in the casita all week. Elena's side was as messy as she left it. Unmade bed, strewn clothes, shoes everywhere. It was shocking. Her sister always cleaned up after Elena. She laid the kid on Laura's neatly made bed. She called the girl's name and shook her gently. No response. The blonde, bouncy curls that had swayed when they tried the latest viral TikTok dance that morning before their outing into the forest were matted with mud and blood. The kid's flat chest seemed too still. Had it been a mistake moving the girl? Elena caught sight of herself in the full-length mirror. Her dark brown skin shone from the effort of carrying this kid. The bald head she'd shaved to celebrate her freedom from the Global Academy, from the confines of this place, appeared oversized. The big eyes that everyone always complimented her on were full of tears. The slender frame she worked hard at, swimming 2, sometimes 3 times a day when she wasn't charged with full-time work as a babysitter, made her seem fragile, prepubescent. She was 17 but looked like a 14-year-old. The pink scrubs that identified her immediately to all guests as a babysitter exaggerated that image, softening her. She'd worked hard to appear revolutionary, but now look at her, a terrified kid. Elena sat on the bed to take a breath. She was comforted by the smell of her sister's woody perfume. Laura's row of white uniforms, which denoted her rank as part of the senior leadership team of the hotel's management, was rigid in the closet. On her sister's night table was Elena's final paper, the one she'd written just 2 months ago as a requirement for graduation from the International High School, the case against statelessness. Her teacher had said it was a great paper, great writing, but that it had predictable conclusions. The questions you ask are important, she had said. Truly excellent. But what about solutions? Is there a way through? Still, she'd gotten an A. The walls were decorated with posters from the cities the sisters wished to one day visit together. London, New York, Milan, Paris. Elena called her sister, who didn't answer her cell phone. Elena called again and again and again. Laura finally answered. "I'm busy, Elena," she said sharply, then hung up. Elena knelt next to the bed. She kissed the girl's forehead, tasting the coppery mountain mud. There was a bit of sweetness in it. She remembered how warm the mud had been when she'd first suggested they should do mud masks. The kid's skin didn't feel warm anymore. It felt cold, clammy. Something was changing. The mud had dried and crusted on her skin. The girl's eyelids fluttered. Elena held her breath as it seemed she was on the cusp of opening her eyes. But then the kid seemed to grow even more still, tiny red and blue veins becoming more pronounced beneath the soft, almost transparent skin of her eyelids. Elena called her friend Pablo, praying he'd pick up the phone on the first ring. "Dímelo, loca," Pablo said after lacing his tone. "What did you do now?" Elena felt indignant at the way he stressed the word now. She realized that calling Pablo for help was a bad idea. She needed Laura. "Do you have any more of those yellow pills?" she asked instead. "Muchacha, what's wrong with you? Not on the phone. Swing by if you want it. I'm descaling the fish." Pablo hadn't mentioned it, so apparently the parents of the unconscious girl hadn't yet rung an alarm, demanding to know what the hell had happened to their 8-year-old kid. Elena supposed that, like most people who visited the Grand Paloma Resort to forget their boring, rich lives, to experiment with something shocking and surprising, maybe even transcendental, the unconscious girl's parents were sitting by the pool in the stifling August heat to burn their skin, to get that delicious, tingling feeling that eventually raised their body temperatures, that made them hungry for touching, licking, for feeling a rush of air-conditioned currents on their naked limbs, so that when they left and went back home, they could say to their friends, yes, the Dominican Republic truly is paradise. I'm so happy I got away. Snap out of it, Elena, she told herself. The parents might call for their child any moment. Elena read out loud, let the line ring again. She tried her office line instead. Laura Moreno, Laura said in a sophisticated tone. It's me, Elena said. What? Laura was annoyed. You've got to come to a room now. Calm down. What happened? There's been an accident with the girl from Penthouse 7. Okay, that's the first chapter. How do we feel? One more section? Okay. So I'm gonna read to you, this is a little steamy. You guys ready for a little heat? Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna read this other little chapter. So all you need to know now is that the book, as you can tell, the book is really about these two sisters. And one of them, who's really young, she's only 17, has an accident with this little tourist child. And her older sister decides that she wants to teach her a lesson because she's been taking ecstasy and not being as mature as her older sister thinks she should be. So she lets her believe that something really terrible happened to the girl. And so that's like what starts the spiral that happens over the 1 week that the book takes place. The guy that she called, that's like one of their best friends, is Pablo, who's also a worker in the hotel. And Pablo is just very fixated on getting promoted. And in this hotel, to get promoted, you need to get the guests to write you positive reviews. And he's 2 reviews away from getting promoted, okay? So I'm just gonna read to you. They find that there's a storm coming, and so Pablo has taken the parents of the little girl that got hurt, he's taking them to another hotel, okay? Everybody with me still? Okay, all right. It's hard to be read to, but I like it. I like people reading to me, so I always try to do a little reading. So I'm gonna just start over here. So they just got to this other resort, which is just like the Grand Paloma. It's called the Yellow Paloma, and it's like 5 hours away. So they just arrived. Unbeknownst to Pablo, this was the closest he'd ever come to understanding Laura's mentality. Because it wasn't just this couple that would likely never return to their resort or this island, but everyone in their circle. Each time the experience was revisited, let me just say, on the way there, they see something. They have like an incident involving some children, and the parents are a little bit freaked out. Because it wasn't just this couple that would likely never return to their resort or this island, but everyone in their circle. Each time the experience was revisited, it would become more grotesque, incalculably scarier. Soon enough, the mere mention of the Dominican Republic, of the Caribbean as a whole, would evoke in the family and their friends a vision of gunslinging children ready to city of God any tourists who dare set foot on their land straight to hell. Pablo understood that he had a small window in which to act, influence, correct their narrative. Thank God that just then, they were too shocked to tell him to go. Pablo felt momentary respite from his loneliness, from the heartache he'd been battling. He, an ambassador, was responsible for safeguarding the sanctity of this land. What did he have at his disposal? Only a diamond-rated playground called a resort and his body. Pablo called downstairs, asked for 2 pitchers of palomas be brought to the room, along with an extra bottle of mezcal on a serving tray with all the ingredients to keep the party going. The drinks came insanely fast. He just turned on some Maluma and, hoping for some subliminal messages, played the song Borró Cassette. He'd unbuttoned his shirt and served them all shots. Pa abajo, pa arriba, pa fuera, pa dentro. Without pressuring the couple in any way, he began to dance, moving his hips. And with the infectious energy of a good beat, he actually began to feel better. The drinks did their work. The wife's face flushed red. The husband removed his Gucci loafers. Her shoulders started moving from side to side with surprising spot-on rhythm. Pablo gestured to the husband, asking if it was okay to ask the lady to dance. By way of a response, the husband leaned his athletic body backward and spread his arms on that oyster boucle couch to watch. Pablo kept a respectable distance from the woman, who kept breaching it. Pablo moved away from her. She turned away from him and dug her ass into his groin. Coughing, Pablo moved away from her, extended a hand toward the husband to join. The husband narrowed his gaze, a soft, surprised smile playing on his features as he stared at his drunk wife. He shook his head at Pablo, made some motion with his arms to indicate that they should keep dancing, and stood up. How about another round of shots? The husband said. The wife removed her oversized cotton button-down shirt after she took that shot. Underneath it, she wore a delicate silk camisa, the color of the inner curve of a seashell, the color of her tongue as it wetted her lips. She wasn't wearing a bra. Her nipples were erect, maybe from dancing, maybe from desire. Pablo was astonished when she leaned close enough for him that he could feel those hard buds through the soft fabric. He was even more stunned when she leaned up and kissed him full on the lips. It happened so unexpectedly that he kissed her back without thought. It was a few seconds before he came back to himself, stepping away from her, bracing himself for the husband, rising off the couch and punching him on the jaw. But when he looked at the white couch, the husband was gone. The wife pulled Pablo to her once again, biting his bottom lip, taking his hand in hers and slipping it under the soft camise to touch her soft, barely there breast. He let his body do what it knew to do, easily discarding the shirt, pinching her, returning the bite on her shoulder, leaving a trail of spit as his tongue took in that little bud and flicked it. That trail raised delicious goosebumps on her skin. The wife moaned. From down the hall, Pablo heard the husband's voice call out to them both. "Come to bed," he said. The wife walked ahead, leading the way. She threw her arm back, the pinky of her left hand a hook, all those diamond rings on her ring finger sparkling under the overhead lights. The move was so coordinated that it seemed like she'd done it many times before. Pablo instinctively let his pinky finger strike hers. From somewhere far in the past, he heard the ocean lapping against his old boat. He decided to ignore it. This night would prove to be the worst sexual experience of his life. But just then, Pablo didn't know it. He merely thought, "I can't believe I get paid for this. I can't believe this is my job." That's it. What do you think? All right, so at this point, we can open it up for questions. And if people are feeling shy, I could just keep telling you about my life. Go ahead.
I will go around with this little microphone because not all of us project as well as
Tim just said I'm loud. I'll accept that as a compliment.
So did you have to interview people like in DR about their experiences to kind of get different ideas, or was it just off the dome?
Yeah, so thank you for that question. Yeah, so, I had started talking to people in hotels like years ago. I love to travel, so I've been to like Singapore, I've been to Bali, I've traveled a lot in Europe. So I've been to like England, I studied abroad in London, so I love it there and I go back often. So, I've been to Italy and I've been to Marrakesh and I've been to Spain and France, and I've done mostly all Caribbean islands. And anytime I would travel, I would just ask people like, what's the craziest thing a tourist has done, like what's the most insane thing, And I would always like just laugh and hear these wild stories, But yeah, once I decided to read the book, to write this book, then I became more serious. So I don't have experience in the hotel industry. I've never worked. I worked a lot of service jobs. Like I worked at Ann Taylor when I was in college, and I worked in the food industry. I've worked as a waiter, a waitress. I worked cleaning dorms when I was in college, but never in a hotel. So I did spend quite a bit of time interviewing people about what it's like. And especially when I was in the Caribbean, I was always interested in asking people, like, what was their experience like? And what do tourists have in common across nationalities, right? And so those interviews proved really enlightening. In the Dominican Republic, where I'm from, there's a big humanitarian crisis happening with Haitians who, we have the same island, but Haiti is in one part of the island and the Dominican Republic is in another part. During the last 15 years, Haitians were stripped of their citizenship, so there's no longer birthright citizenship. And so what ended up happening in the Dominican Republic over the last, I would say certainly the last 10 years, is that there have been like these mass sweeps of like deporting people. And when I was there, the summer that I was doing the last big revision on this book, they started setting immigration bans at hospitals so that when like the Haitian women came to give birth, they would like ask them for citizenship papers, and in labor, they would take the women and like take them to detention centers. So it was really like chilling and horrifying. And this is probably like 2023. And so I started interviewing just Haitian people, Dominicans of Haitian descent that had been stripped of their citizenship, just to find out like what it was like for them. In the book, what I decided to do was to try to frame the political landscape the way that I think my characters would have it framed. And so it's in the background of the story. Which I think is a lot of what happens to those of us who have the privilege, even if we're in like a more disadvantaged place in society, like the workers. There's like this gradation that happens where like you can still ignore the misfortune that happens to people that are further down in the stratification of society. So I wanted to show that, like for my characters. I have one character who's really invested in trying to change the lot of what's happening in the mass deportations, but then I have another character who she's like, we need to take care of ourselves, like we're in trouble. And so you have that tension between the two sisters. I have to say though, like when I was interviewing people, I happened to have a lot of conversations with tourists because I was a tourist too in some of the places. And it's just really interesting to me how privilege blinds us in a way that I think is really difficult for us to see it. And so, I think more often than not, people don't realize that they're dehumanizing workers or treating them like a function. And I think that maybe because, when I traveled to the United States, I was 10, and we weren't brought up in the Dominican Republic to think of ourselves as Black people. Like, we were brought up to think of ourselves as mixed people. And the people who are the Black people are the underclass, who are the Haitians. And I think coming to this country, when I was a child and going to college and realizing that in my life, unless you hear me talk, and you're like, that's an interesting accent, most people assume that I'm Black. I'm an African-American person. And so for me, during college especially, I had this kind of racial awakening where I was like, wait a minute. Am I a Black person? And I had a best friend from Trinidad. And I had another best friend who was black American from Harlem. She lived like 3 blocks away from me, but we hadn't met until college. And my friend Gina was like, did you grow up without a mirror? Like, are you really asking us if you're black? And I was like, no, listen, give me some credit. Like, we were brought up to not really think of ourselves, especially when we traveled here, you know, in the 90s, there was no such thing as like Afro-Latinidad. Like, you were Latina, you were like not black, and if you were black, you were black. Even black people didn't really treat folks that are like foreigners that are black as being part of the black diaspora. And so for me, it's just been really interesting, like having this kind of awakening, I think, when I was like young, when I was 18 years old, because then any time I went back to the Dominican Republic, I would think like, this is insane that everybody acts like they don't see it. They don't see the injustice. They don't see how terrible we're treating our neighbors, right? And, you know, and it's been like a source of tension in my family, sometimes a source of tension with my work. Because, you know, when you go there and you realize like, yes, I understand there's like a lot of nuance and difficulties for me that I can understand about like unfettered, you know, illegal immigration, but there is something so cruel about the way that it's being handled. And so, you know, I get into a lot of arguments with people there. But it was really, I think it was really helpful for me because I think as a writer, having that opportunity to like almost switch places, to be like, oh, sometimes I'm the privileged tourist who is just having a cocktail and having a great time. And then sometimes I'm in a position in society where I feel really vulnerable. And I feel like in danger of survival. And I think that that for me has really allowed me, especially when I do the rigor of like talking to people who are in different positions than me, and don't have the privilege that I have of being an American citizen, right? Like, I mean, I have a passport, like I can go wherever I want. For now. So I think it's been really interesting, like having those conversations and having my lived experience, which helps me to like access, I think, a lot of my preoccupations with like inequality and class.
With that, we have reached the part of our podcast where we turn to our Club Book audience for questions and comments for Cleyvis Natera and her work. In this book club, we like to encourage members and authors to connect and engage and help bridge the gap between the page you read and the process it took to write it. Our first question of the night comes from an audience member wondering about the theme of home in her books.
Yeah, I think about home a lot. You know, when we left the Dominican Republic, I was 10, and we left my father. Because my father did not want to travel here. And I, you know, when I was a kid, I remember the only way, and this is now like 1989, 1990. So most working class people didn't have phones with like international calling plans. And I remember like we had to go to like a calling center to call my dad, and we would each get like 1 or 2 minutes to talk to him. And I would just think like it would be like once a month. And I would think the whole month, like, what can I tell him about the subway? Like, what can I tell him about? I remember the first time I ate like chicken nuggets at public school, being like, this food is disgusting, you know? And being like, how do you explain? Like, I ate this thing, it tastes like plastic, but they say it's chicken, you know? So I feel like I spent so much time thinking about language as a child and thinking about like being concise, which you can't tell because I love to talk. But you know, when I'm like writing the books, I'm thinking a lot about like, well, how do you talk about that longing for like, you know, because I was very close to my dad, you know? And so I remember it being like this painful process, but like with words, I could like collapse the distance between us. Like it was like, even if it was 2 minutes, like he would laugh and I would be like, I'm on fire, you know? And that love would carry me for the next month that we spoke. And, you know, I think it's really interesting now that I'm older, you know, and I think about how each stage of my life, like I remember when I went away to college, and no one in my family had gone away to college. I had plenty of aunts who were old enough who wanted to go. And my grandmother was the Dominican Republic is a pretty conservative society. It's very religious, it's very Christian. And so everybody was very afraid that if you sent the kids to college, they were gonna have a lot of sex, which is true. But that was not the reason that I wanted to go. You know, I wanted to go to like get a college degree and like, you know, like better myself. And I remember when I went to college, like being really homesick. And then finding like, you know, I ended up in this group, you know, I was like a scholarship kid. So they brought us the summer before college started because, you know, they assumed that we hadn't been properly prepared for the rigor of college. And we spent 4 weeks. There were 15 of us and from all over the country. And I just made like this tight-knit group of friends. And like, I mean, I'm still friends with a lot of them, you know, but like, so to me, that became a home. Like I was so homesick for home, and then I had these friends, and my expansion of the idea of what home can be became people, right? It became books, you know. For a long time, I was having an awful time at home. I mean, my mom married this guy that was terrible. And so, you know, when you're growing up in a house where, you know, there was still a lot of love in our house, but there was like a lot of violence. And I remember at a certain point, like I would just leave my house every day and go to the library. That's why I love libraries. Like invite me to a library, I'm coming. And it's like, you know, like the library became my home because there, like I could stay for 6 hours and not be worried, you know? And so, you know, one of the things that I like to think about is in my books, right? If like this thing about like finding peace, and I don't know about all of you, because there's a lot of you here, but some of you might have some complicated feelings about home. And most of us don't end up staying in the place where we're born, right? Like most of us, even if it means leaving that house and going somewhere else. And so this kind of like complicated feeling, I mean, it's so crazy. I'll tell you a short little story. My sister, we all grew up in this house, right? And I'm telling you, it was like very rough. So when I decided I was going to go to college and everybody was like, she's going to be a slut, you know? And I had to convince my mom at 17 years old, like, I've always been a good kid. I'm not out here running the streets. I'm like a serious student. I had gotten an astonishing amount of money to go to college. And so it was also like a really good opportunity that I would finish college, because a lot of my friends that started college and had to work, it would take them either a long time or they would drop out. And it was like God that made my mom agree to send me, because the whole family was like, you will lose her, you know? And it's wild because like both my sisters, my brother is in the Dominican Republic, but both my sisters we're all very close. My older sister lives in the Bronx, and my younger sister still lives at home in that apartment. And she now has 2 daughters, and one of her daughter has 2 kids. And they live in the same 3-bedroom apartment, okay? I don't know how they do it. It's great. I get to benefit because every time I come, the food is so good, and everybody's cooking all the time, so it's wonderful. But I was like talking to my sister because I'm like, now we're in our 40s. Is anybody shocked? Still no shock sounds? Okay. I'm gonna try again one more time later. Somebody has to be like, so like we're in our 40s now. Oh, very good, very good. So we're like in our 40s, and I'm like, how are you still here? This lady's crazy. I love my mom, but she's crazy. And like my sister's like, I like being home. Like, so like for me, you know, being comfortable in my skin and being comfortable in my life really meant leaving and going to college, which was only 3 hours away, but felt like 100, you know, hours away. And for my sister, you know, even though we both suffered like abuse and she had it worse than me, for her safety means staying there, you know, and staying close to my mom. So I just feel like it's so complicated to think about home and to think about like, how do we feel safe? Like, it's through community, it's through love, really, and just getting my characters to figure that out is hard because they're stubborn and they don't want to learn good lessons. So it's also like kind of interesting to like have this puzzle where you're like, okay, what I need you to really understand is like the value of creating a home and a community where you feel safe.
This audience member asks if there will be a sequel to the Grand Paloma Resort.
Yeah, so my older sister loves books and she loves romances. And she's made me promise her that I will. I think for right now, I'm not ready to go back to those characters. But you know what's so weird about being a writer is that sometimes, and like my friend Nigar, I wonder if you have the same feeling with your characters. that sometimes I'll just be minding my business and I'll be like, I wonder what Luz is doing today. You know, like, it's like so insane that you're like, oh, I wonder what these characters are doing, you know, because they're alive in our imaginations. And we have to be so, it's like being like a surgeon. Like, you have to suture the story in a way that makes sense for the confines you've established. But there's just so much more life that you don't put in a book. So yeah, I definitely would love to go back to that. I would love to go back to that story, yeah.
This question is about what Cleyvis Natera is writing next.
So what I decided to do, because, you know, my mom didn't raise no fool, is that when my editor was so excited immediately about the concept of a resort book, I decided that it was going to be a series of resort books, you know? And so I sold a second book, which is, it takes place in Curacao, which is an island that I had never been to. It's one of the few islands I hadn't been to. And I chose it for a few reasons, but also because my protagonist hadn't been there. And I wanted to pick a place where I also hadn't been there so I could experience it for the first time. And so the plot of this one is a little different because I was thinking a lot about my experience as an executive when I worked my corporate job. And so my protagonist is an executive for the Paloma Resort conglomerate. And she goes to the hotel and finds out there's like a very big mystery. It's so good. So then, like, what I decided to do was that I was like, oh, what do I want to learn more about? And I decided that I'm really interested in medical tourism. Because I was like, you know, I feel like in this book, it's really about people traveling for pleasure. And how, like, there's a line where, like, the pleasure becomes criminal. And some people never pay for crossing that line, right? But workers are penalized greatly if they cross certain lines, right? And so I was thinking a lot about, like, what are the other reasons that people travel? And I've been really obsessed with this kind of like the running target. And it used to be mainly women, but that's not the case anymore. Men feel the pressure more now, I would say, certainly than when I was growing up. So I started going down these rabbit holes, finding out what people travel for. And it is just fascinating. So the resort is, you know, a resort that provides medical treatments, very luxe though. Like, we're not talking about 50% Brazilian butt lifts. Like, the Paloma Resort is offering some very luxe medical experiences. And then I wanted to put, you know, like a protagonist is a little older, you know, and she's just gotten like the job of her dreams. And then she has to deal with like whether or not she's going to expose some of the things she learns about. And this book is not 7 days, it's a long weekend. My editor hasn't seen it yet, so if when you buy the book it's 7 days, you'll know why. She'll be like, where's the rest of the week?
Our next question is about the role of nature in Natera's books.
So, you know, one of the things that I love about the Dominican Republic, and one of the things that I feel like is really special about the Caribbean, is that it is like the most beautiful region in the world. And I'm not just saying it because I'm biased. Like, you know, I traveled to Bali with my family 3 years ago, and you know, everybody says Bali is the most beautiful place, right? And it is beautiful, but it's not beautiful like Jamaica. It's not beautiful like the Dominican Republic. And so one of the things that I was thinking about was, you know, if I could take some of the experiences I've had in different Caribbean islands and put it in this kind of fictional town, that is kind of a combination. Like in Neruda on the Park, I decided to put a neighborhood in New York City that is all the boroughs, just concentrated in like this little park. And then like I wanted to do kind of something similar in the Caribbean where, you know, there are certain elements and certain, like there's a beach that I go with my family, you know, every spring break because my husband loves it. And so that beach is there in the resort. And yeah, I was just thinking about like how, like people, us, right, like humans, like we behave in such ugly ways. But then you can never deny the beauty of like nature and how nature can be like a balm in some ways. Like nature can help us heal from like the terrible things that we've experienced as children. And I feel that certainly whenever I'm in the Caribbean, that I'm like, oh, I feel renewed. And not just because of all the drinks, you know, like I feel like spiritually renewed. And it feels like it was like really important to me that the book, even though it's dealing with some like heavy aspects of like, you know, just inequity and how like we take advantage of each other. I also wanted the reading to feel beautiful. Like I wanted the breaks in the book for the reader to be like around nature and healing. Because I think that can help us heal too. As we read about difficult things, it makes it easier for us to choose difficult books. And I think sometimes like the beach concept of this beach, a lot of people read vacation books because they want to read light things. And I was like, well, can I make you enjoy a book that's like a different kind of beach read? So that it's still enjoyable, but it makes you think a little bit.
Our last question of the night comes from a fan wondering what Natera likes to read.
Oh my goodness, I love to read so much. You know, it's hard for me because I teach writing now, and I spend so much time reading my students' writing, which is very different. You know, like they're wonderful and creative, but more often than not, there's like technical problems that we're trying to teach them. I love teaching my undergrad students. This semester, I'm teaching an MFA program and also my undergrad students. And the undergrad students are just like wild. Like everybody's so concerned for our youth because they're like AI. And I'm like, no, if they're having fun, they create these incredible books, you know, and I really love it. But yeah, for me, like reading has since I was a kid and I was going to the library. It's been like this escape, this beautiful. So I'll tell you what I've been reading lately. I just finished reading Last Night in Brooklyn, which is my friend Xochitl Gonzalez. She and I kind of started when I came back to writing at Breadloaf. That's where I met my friend Xochitl. And her book is like, oh my God, nostalgia. It's like 2007, and it's all about this kind of striving young workers, like, you know, and they're all like in the summer and partying, and it's a retelling of The Great Gatsby. And so, because I'm moderating a talk with her in 2 weeks, I just reread The Great Gatsby. And I was like, oh my God, I remember when this felt like work. Like in the margins, I wrote my notes from college. And I was like, oh, poor Cleyvis, there were a lot of words that we didn't know. So I was like, I'm so glad my vocabulary is better. But then it's like, I mean, it's a delightful book, The Great Gatsby. You know, and I gotta be honest with you, I don't think if my friend Xochitl hadn't rewritten that story, I don't think I would have reread it. And I keep all my books because I was an English major, and that was really delightful. I just read, I already told you, I like heavy books too. So I just read Giselle Pellicott, A Hymn to Life. And she's a German woman who discovered that her husband had been drugging her and bringing men into her house and assaulting her. And, you know, I had a really hard time because, you know, I come from a family where there's been like sexual abuse, and it's really difficult for me to like read books that touch on that topic. But then I thought about like, oh my God, like we have to bear witness. You know, like we have to force ourselves. And I feel like we're part of a society where like, I spend a lot of time on social media, you know, and I'm like laughing. Everybody knows I'm like in a very intense place in my life right now with the books. Everybody sends me ridiculous videos and I'm like, this is so hilarious, you know. But then it's like we also have to force ourselves to confront the truth because we're living through like a global humanitarian crisis. Like what the hell is happening to us? Seriously, it's like you want to laugh, but you want to throw yourself on the ground and cry every day. So I decided to read this book because I was like, we have to do the heavy lifting. And it ended up being one of the most inspiring books I read. Like, I just cannot believe the strength that this woman has. I feel like, you know, there's just like a lot that we don't know about like the kind of global impact of the toxicity. Like boys, men, like there's something in the water that is telling the men they should harm us. And there are so many, like my husband and like my brother, like I have men in my life who are dedicated to like kindness. But there's a whole other wave of cruelty, right? And so I've been like really thinking that it's important for us to have these conversations because it's hard to talk about the difficult things. And so, yeah, so I've gotten a few people to read the book. It's a hard book to read. But I have to say that I found it to be uplifting and really beautiful in a way I wasn't expecting. Is that a good place to end?
That wraps up our Scott County Library event with Cleyvis Natera. Make sure to catch our next podcast with Daniel H. Wilson. Daniel Wilson is a frequent New York Times bestseller with a long bibliography that spans speculative fiction, techno-thrillers, and science satire. His latest novel, Hole in the Sky, is an alien encounter story inspired by the author's own Cherokee background. Visit us online at clubbook.org for details on past and present seasons, sign up for our e-newsletter, check out our calendar, and so much more. Stay up to date with all of our events at our Club Book Facebook page. If you're on Twitter, find us using the handle ClubBookMN. And if you enjoy these free Club Book events and podcasts, remember to share them with your friends. They just may too. Thanks again to all those who make Club Book possible, including MELSA, Library Strategies, and Minnesota's Arts and Cultural Heritage Fund. Our sponsors include Red Balloon Bookshop, where you can purchase all the books featured in Club Book. Finally, a very special thank you to all the libraries hosting events this season. That's it for Club Book, the coolest club in town. We'll see you at the library.